We're back again for another episode of the Intelligence Assessment with Kevin Shipp. I'm delighted to be joined by Kevin. How you doing, Kevin?
Hey, Jason. It's good to be with you again.
Pleasure to see you as always. You know, Kevin, earlier in the week, Michael Moore of True Pundit dropped an incredible bombshell where he revealed that he's been writing a book where he's compiled testimony from members of Congress, retired FBI agents, and a variety of other people who are telling him that the United States, including Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama, were fully aware that the country of Iran was harboring Osama bin Laden for more than a decade. And not only did the United States intelligence agencies know this and not take action, they suppressed whistleblowers who tried to bring this information forward. Now, suppression of whistleblowers is something that you're all too familiar with, and today you've prepared a presentation for us about the alleged assassination of Osama bin Laden. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And as we've covered in previous shows, you always have to analyze critically what the government says about everything, especially a classified operation. There is an operative term, especially within the CIA, called plausible denial, and that is a programmatic procedure used throughout the agency to deny the truth if they have to do so to protect an operation in their minds, or protect some source or method, which is usually not the case. But so plausible denial, in other words, that's authorized lying, and we see some of that here in this case. There's no reason for the CIA and the President of the United States to lie to the American people about the killing of the world's most wanted terrorists, and yet that's what they did in some cases.
Well, you've prepared another one of your always interesting and comprehensive PowerPoint presentations. Why don't we dive into that? You'll take us through some of the details and then we can talk about it a bit.
Yes, great, sure, Jason. Let me just start off with a brief comment. This picture in the White House Situation Room of the cabinet members watching the raid. Boy, there's so much body language in this, it's funny. We could spend 30 minutes on that, but I want to point out, which has been pointed out, I don't think totally correctly, Secretary of State Clinton's got her hand over her mouth, and most people analyze that to be, quote unquote, that she was shocked at what she was seeing when she should have been acting professional. No, in forensic psychophysiology, when you put your hand over your mouth, you're subconsciously trying to stop yourself from saying something. Usually that's how people try to block a lie, and they don't even know how they're doing it. So she's got her hand over her mouth. That says a lot. Boy, you wish you could be a fly on the wall, but that's not a look of shock or surprise. That's her subconsciously covering her mouth, not to say what she'd like to blurt out. But anyway, moving on. Let's go. It's kind of a fun picture to analyze, really. Three guys have their arms crossed. It's interesting. All right, let's move on to the next one. Now, this is, and I've been following this for some time, and Michael Moore is absolutely correct that Al-Qaeda had a relationship with Iran and was stationed and based in Iran for many, many years. And because they had a common enemy, Iran was hosting Al-Qaeda, providing them with weapons, providing them with funding and support, and everything that Al-Qaeda needed to become a stronger enemy against primarily the United States. While Barack Obama himself was trying to make it look like they defeated ISIS, and it was no longer a big organization but just a splinter, that whole time Al-Qaeda was in Iran, being supported by Iran, and was actually being strengthened. So that position on the behalf of Barack Obama was simply a fabrication, to put it nicely. Why would they want to fabricate that? Well, just in my humble opinion, he didn't want the American people to know that Al-Qaeda was growing stronger under his so-called leadership. He wanted to look like Al-Qaeda had basically been defeated. That was not true. I think it was probably a political fib. And as we know, Seymour Hersh came out with another book about this, and he interviewed some people directly. And he's, as you could imagine, has been harshly criticized in several sectors from writing that book. And if you go straight into the points that he makes, it's worth reading just for the sake of analysis. Hirsch claims that he met with senior ISI officials who advised him that it was not a courier that the CIA had been following that led them to bin Laden, that it was an ISI former intelligence officer who wanted to collect the reward money that leaked where Osama bin Laden was, which Pakistani ISI knew, that's their intelligence, knew all about. So the account of the courier was a fabrication. I can tell you this. The CIA and the administration claimed that it was waterboarding and the torture program that led eventually to the location and the killing of Osama bin Laden. That could not be farther from the truth. They got no information from any of the torture as to where bin Laden was or his whereabouts. As a matter of fact, out of John Brennan's own mouth, they got no substantive intelligence at all from the torture program. So there's another fabrication.
Wow.
So here they are. Now we know that government people fib, especially in the intelligence circles, aka plausible denial. But you boil it down, you got the President of the United States and his senior cabinet officials intentionally lying to the American people. And as you know, that's the basis of my whole mission, to expose the fact that our government lies to us as a way of doing business. Right. And that's a constitutional crisis. So the CIA ran this raid, allegedly, and I think that is accurate. The CIA ran the raid on the compound, but the CIA will not release any information about that raid, the location, status of the body, anything, because, and here's the clincher, the CIA has special legal authority to keep information from ever being made public. So let that hang there for a little bit. The CIA is supposed, in a constitutional government, the CIA is supposed to work for us and the congressmen and the cabinet level representatives, not themselves.
Right.
But that's not the way it works. And we can do whole broadcasts and have done on that. So obviously the CIA refused any requests about the state of the body, DNA evidence, testing, proof that it was bin Laden, how his body was disposed of, or anything.
That's really crazy, Kevin, because, I mean, basically what you're telling us is that the CIA can do whatever it wants, and it's got actual authority to disallow anyone from ever looking at it. This is the total opposite of a government for the people, by the people, and of the people. It's sort of a government that's serving whoever is in charge of the CIA.
Exactly right, Jason. That's why I call it the shadow government. It's kind of a government in and of itself that wields the power of secrecy in a completely unbridled fashion. And that's how my mission started. I saw the CIA do that, actually shut down and seal evidence of personal injury and use their power of secrecy to silence even congressional investigations into that. And hence my mission started in 2012 when I put the book out. So that's the CIA. And that's why we need reform in the CIA and real oversight, because it has become a power in and unto itself.
Wow.
Let's go to the next one. Now, Michael Moore, I can't wait for his book to come out, but based on the interview that you did with him the other day, it's got some very, very interesting information. And I think people should get that book and read it as soon as it comes out. What I have, over the past couple of years, looked into was the statements by the Department of Defense, kind of owner, manager of the SEAL teams, and these logistics people who put this together. They went to the Department of, I believe it was the Associated Press, went to the Department of Defense and requested through FOIA information regarding the shooting of bin Laden, photos, proof of his death, etc. And this is what the Department of Defense came back and said. These lies are so ridiculous, it almost makes you wonder if the Department of Defense is saying, we know this is a lie, we want you to see it's a lie because they're telling us to tell you a lie. But the Department of Defense said this: they could locate no photos or videos of the mission or of bin Laden's body. Now, just think about that for a moment. You've got the world's #1 most wanted terrorist. They get him, they bag him, and yet they can't find any photos of the actual killing. And remember Saddam Hussein's sons, Jason?
Yeah.
When they blew them up, I think it was an RPG, and stitched them up. They showed those gruesome photos to the world.
Right. It looked like they had gotten run over by a steamroller, but they put them all over the newspaper, and then they decided out of respect for bin Laden, they wouldn't show any photos of him dead?
Yeah, respect for a guy that supposedly killed almost 3,000 Americans. They're going to show him respect. That doesn't pass the critical smell test.
But
But
Kevin,
even,
I think a lot of the audience members and me don't necessarily understand the relationship between the CIA and the Department of Defense. I thought the Department of Defense encompasses kind of like everything. What is that relationship?
no, it's separate. They're intertwined through secret programs, but the CIA is the gatekeeper for secret operations. In this case, especially this one. So the Department of Defense has to bow to the CIA if it demands that this information be held top secret or above and cannot be disclosed to any other parties. And the Department of Defense has to follow that authority and parrot out what the CIA has told them in their briefings or in their classified memos. So,
But the headquarters for the Department of Defense is the Pentagon, right?
Right, correct, yes. Right.
So if September 11th was an attack on the Pentagon and the CIA can do all this secret stuff that the Department of Defense doesn't know about, it's entirely possible that the CIA could attack the Pentagon.
Well, hey, with the CIA, all things are possible.
Wow.
I was out in the field quite a bit myself, and I can tell you when we went out there, we had the power and the authority to kind of boss the Army and Navy guys and ladies around, and man, they did not like that, as you could imagine. Excuse me. And I became a big supporter of the military because I thought that was outrageous. You go into Afghanistan to a troop that's been there, a major that's been there on his third or her third tour, knows more about the place than you'll ever know, and yet they got to follow your stupid orders. And so, of course, when I'd go out there, I'd defer to them and say, hey, look, you've been here longer than I have. Let's sit down and tell me what you know, and I'm here to help. And got a whole lot of cooperation out of our troops and that. So the Department of Defense and the troops, I'm a big supporter of the military. Sometimes they have to serve the behest of the CIA, and I can tell you they don't like it.
Wow.
So now listen to this one, Jason. So they go to the DOD. This again is Associated Press, FOIA on behalf of the American people, and they want to see photos, proof that Osama bin Laden is indeed dead. Right. That's a huge piece of nationally sought after information. And what about this burial at sea? You buried him at sea. Did you take any photographs when you slid him off the pallet into the water, allegedly? This was the DOD's response. The DOD could not locate photos of the body while it was being buried at sea. And only a few of the commanders on board at the time witnessed the event. None of the other crew did. Once again, the fabrications are so ridiculous, like finding the passport of one of the hijackers a few blocks down from the Twin Towers, an impossibility. The lies are so ridiculous, it almost makes you wonder if the DOD is trying to say, hey, they're making us make up this lie, and we're wording it this way, so you know it's ridiculous. Because it's so stupid.
Yeah.
You know. And then the last one, as kind of along the lines of what we're looking at here, this is probably the most egregious. All right. So you showed the photograph of Saddam's kids to prove that you've gotten these two terrorists and sewed them back up just for the picture. And yet you've got a wanted terrorist far more significant and wanted than them. You got him finally killed, and yet you don't photograph him to show the people of the world, we got him. Here's proof he's dead. But not only that, the DOD claimed it could not find, and those are important words. Everything that comes out in these statements, every word is selected and chosen. And I know because I had to write reports like this and redone and refurbished time after time after time till it's like concentrated lemon juice, and then it's put out to be sold. But the DOD responded with this. They could not find a death certificate of Osama bin Laden. They couldn't find any autopsy results of Osama bin Laden. And there was no DNA identification that it was bin Laden that was killed.
Now, would they
They,
normally do an autopsy when they shoot somebody? Isn't it death by gunshot? Do you need an
yeah,
autopsy for that?
yeah, they would anyway. They'd shoot him, and then they'd see what kind of toxicology. It's SOP. See what kind of toxicology came out too. In addition to the fact that allegedly his head was split in two, standard procedure, but none was done. And I think the biggest thing here is it sticks out like a sore thumb. There was no DNA identification. In other words, you could, if, as a former police officer, there was no positive ID. Basically, that this indeed was the guy. So, with the most historical terrorist figure in history, they did none of this. Again, the fabrication is so ridiculous, it almost begs people not to believe it. But this is what they put out.
Right. Now, you know what I've noticed recently about these death photos of Saddam Hussein's sons that was really strange is that it's also strange that it's not showing up for whatever reason. The pictures of Saddam Hussein's sons dead look almost like rubber masks on a it doesn't look, it could be anyone with like a death mask on. Like, I don't know if you can see these images, Kevin. Let me see if I can get it over there on the screen that you're looking at as well. Things are always a little bit wild and woolly when you get outside of the main studio, but this also might be hard to see on the screen share, but this looks very much like a painted rubber mask. I mean, the color of the guy's skin doesn't even match the color of the body. Like, how is this a real, this is supposedly Uday Hussein, but I mean, it just looks like a clay mask on any dead body. Look at the nose, doesn't look real.
That's a good point, Jason. The CIA's got a whole department that has that down to a science, creating masks for people. They could easily have done that.
And see, the thing that I find strange about this, Kevin, is that this main photo of Uday Hussein that we've seen, so it's got this is, I believe, called a Y incision, which is what's normally done in an autopsy when they're going to take out all the guts and whatever. But I'd be curious to ask a pathologist if that's kind of standard procedure. I mean, we'd have to ask, I guess, a military pathologist, which might be difficult to find. But, I mean, again, if you blow somebody up, do you really need an autopsy? The guy obviously died due to being blown up. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But I just recently noticed, I was fascinated by these photos because they're super grisly, but it just looks fake as hell.
Well, and you got to ask yourself, you know, their bodies were blown to smithereens and they sewed them back together, but their faces are perfectly intact. You know, where is some of the shrapnel and other things that would have scarred their faces badly? Their faces are just so perfect. You're right. It kind of makes you wonder.
Yeah, and to pay some particular attention. I don't know, again, if you're able to see the detail in what I'm sending to you, but like, look at right where the head, like the face meets the scalp. It literally just looks like a clay mask that's been placed on somebody else's face. You know, they're not even bothering. This is, first of all, an extremely low resolution photo that we've got right here. It's not really high enough resolution to make this determination, but can you see this part right here, this edge?
Yeah.
I mean, I say that's a fake mask. The eyebrows look fake. The whole thing looks fake.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's a very good point because there's no injuries. The faces are perfect. When the rest of the bodies were mangled and blown all over the smithereens, the faces are perfectly intact with no gashes, stitches, marks, or anything.
And then, I mean, we've got this other photo. Why would they bother putting all that makeup over a bunch of dead guys that they just, I mean, just none of this makes any sense. So I've always been bothered by the lack of photos of Osama bin Laden, and all the points that you've raised are interesting. So even when the Department of Defense is not satisfied by something that the CIA does, the CIA just says, too bad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a classified operation. They've signed the secrecy oaths at high-level secrecy oaths, and they cannot violate those whether they like it or not. And most of the DoD, even up into the ranks of the generals, they want to keep their job and their retirement, so they just march along and say, "Okay, we'll do it. Let's move on to the next assignment." And that's the way the system has been built and has been working for over 60 years.
And then, you know, Kevin, I think that there was a bit of a response to people being kind of dissatisfied by some of the points that you're raising, to the extent that, you know, this alleged death photo was released. And I think people rightly pointed out that this also seems fake, because they just took a picture of Osama bin Laden alive and, you know, kind of, you know, mussed up his eyes and just made him look like a mess.
Same smile in death as he had in life, huh?
Yeah. I mean, what this is pointing out is that it's obviously this particular photo that was used, and then you can even see, I mean, this is like pretty poor Photoshop work. I think Sunday with Charles has better graphics than the CIA, because you could see that the beard is just blurred out and put over somebody else's body.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And they tracked that down, and that came from a really irreputable site that made up that picture. Had circulated in the Middle East for months and months and months until they traced it back to the source, and it was a fake.
I see. I see. So, okay, so this brings me to my next question. Now, a lot of people who heard Michael Moore's report were saying, how is it possible that Iran would be cooperating with Saudi Arabia and the United States? I mean, they all hate each other.
Well, you know, it goes back to, why do progressives saddle up with radical Islamicists against the Constitution and conservative America? They have the same enemy. It's the single enemy concept, where Iran tolerated Al-Qaeda and vice versa because they both want to bring down the United States. So they overlook, one's a Sunni, one's a Shia. They overlook even their deep religious differences because they got one single target, the great Satan, over in America. And so that's why they took them in. That's why Iran supported them with the money and the arms, equipment that they needed, because they saw it as a way to get the West at the same time. What our government did was keep that to themselves and hide the fact that not only did they know Al-Qaeda was in Iran, but was being supported by Iran and was not weaker, it was growing stronger.
Why would the U.S. cooperate with that? That's the part that doesn't make any sense to me. It's, from what Michael described, I mean, it's one thing to know it and sort of not... It's such a problem for me, because they were covering up these whistleblowers so aggressively. It's almost like they wanted to keep him there safe.
Well, that's what it's a procedure. I go into this in the third hour of my lecture. It is a practiced standard procedure to destroy whistleblowers. They use the same procedure every time. I go into it into detail. I was a manager. They tried to get me to use it on some employees, and I refused. So with whistleblower, whatever they're blowing the whistle on, there's automatically a procedure to bring them down unless they fight hard enough to just disregard that system and go around it. So the fact that they attack the whistleblowers, that's just what they do. But why would the United States allow that to happen? It's like this, Jason. And I was back in the agency during these days when the Soviets had invaded Afghanistan, and Soviets then being our supposed arch enemy. We sent all of our top agents and operators in there to train the Islamic Mujahideen on how to blow up cars, build missiles, build booby traps, how to shoot, on and on and on and on. Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan at that time, leading those tribes. And the CIA comes out with this statement. Here we go again. Well, yeah, we did train the Afghan Mujahideen, but we never trained bin Laden because he wasn't in the tribe we were training. Wow. So let's just walk that back. Yeah. So we trained all of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, but we did not train their senior-most commander, Osama bin Laden. We're either that stupid or we're lying like dogs, and I think it's probably the latter.
Now, this is exactly what I wanted to ask you about, Kevin. Right now I'm showing a picture of some Mujahideen fighters. Mujahideen, of course, as I understand it, means Army of God. This picture shows Jamal Khashoggi, and it says Arab news correspondent Jamal Khashoggi with some of the Arab Mujahideen. On Khashoggi's left is Jamal Fazan, but basically this is the journalist who's gone missing and is presumed dead and chopped up in the Saudi embassy in Turkey. And here he is hanging out with the Mujahideen. What do we make of this?
Well, now, not only that, if he was just a reporter in there reporting on the Mujahideen, he wouldn't be holding a shoulder-fired missile in the picture, looking like a rebel. That's one of the weirdest things about it, making himself look like he's part of the rebels. Yeah, that's really, really, really strange photograph.
Well, talk to us about that for a second, Kevin. I mean, that's an obviously dangerous piece of equipment. It doesn't seem like something a journalist would want to pick up.
No, and I've had some experience with those, and you better know what you're doing when you fire it. You certainly better not stand behind it. And there are some Islamic fighters that forget the Stinger missile part, where you don't stand behind the Stinger, and they stand behind it anyway, and that's a self-correcting mistake. They're never able to do that again. But yeah, that's not a toy. Let's just put it that way. That thing causes severe damage.
But do you think that this photo in and of itself, showing the guy holding it, I mean, a doubter could say, oh, well, they just wanted to take a cool photo. They showed him how to hold it. It just seems like something that even someone careless would not necessarily do, unless they've been trained in it and know how to use it, and they're part of the Mujahideen.
I agree with you. I agree with you. If he was just standing there, as we were saying, if he was just standing there in the photograph as a reporter, no problem.
Right.
But he's standing there with a lethal weapon, smiling, holding it as if he's one of the Mujahideen rebels themselves. So that's a very, very odd picture. He traced that all the way up to Khashoggi's disappearance and death, and also a so-called Washington Post contributor, as the Post claims. But yeah, it's just very, very odd. There's a lot of oddities about that, and now they're leaking stuff, supposedly leaking that, well, Khashoggi had an Apple iWatch on that filmed the whole thing, and that's out there in the cloud. That is not proven. And you know, when these things happen, you have got to watch the spin on it and where they're trying to go with it. There's more here, I think, than meets the eyes. I think he was indeed murdered. I don't think there's any question, at least in my mind, about that. But the question is why. The question is who was he. The question is who was he really connected to. And, you know, a lot of that stuff still has to be answered.
And his uncle was Adnan Khashoggi, a very well-known arms dealer, right?
Yeah.
So these guys were pretty connected in the world of terrorism. He's not just some, you know, nice reporter who's hanging out. I mean, I'm still stuck on this photograph because I'm just thinking, I mean, I can speak for myself only. If I was ever in a circumstance where I was hanging out with some soldiers, I think just standing there with them while they're holding the deadly weapons is badass enough. I don't know that I would even want to handle that. So can you tell from the photo, is this a Stinger? Because there's a lot of different bazooka, surface-to-air missile type weapons, right? Is this an actual Stinger?
No. That's not a Stinger. That's an RPG rocket launcher, which is Stingers are pretty bad. This is one notch down from a Stinger. You know, it makes you want to conjecture. Let's see. His dad was a major arms dealer. Maybe he's holding one of the prototypes of which they just sold a few thousand to the Muj, and he's standing there being the salesman, and they have him hold the gun that he just sold them a bunch of. You know, if you tie that together with his dad. That could be the case.
Can we tell the origin of this weapon just by looking at it?
No, just at first glance, it looks like looks Soviet-made, but I can't tell from the picture.
Okay. Well, that would make sense. I mean, if the Soviet fighters were there, you know, weapons could be stolen, etc. I mean, what I'm trying to get at is, how does the safe handling of something like this compare to something like an M16? Is there a safety on it? Is it much more dangerous to just pick this up than it would be a normal gun?
Yeah, like maybe 100 times dangerous, more dangerous. Yeah, Yeah, I
Right.
mean, if that thing, if he pulled the trigger right where he has that sucker pointed, uh, probably everybody in that picture would be dead. And it does have safeties on it if you know what you're doing. There have been so many accidents with those weapons; it's ridiculous because people don't realize how powerful they are and how how sensitive the trigger is. So it's so odd that he's holding that. But again, his dad's a chief arms dealer, and who knows? Maybe he was a U.S. and this is just conjecture. Maybe he was a U.S. cutout to provide arms to the Mujahideen, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we'd be, and not we, but that those parts of our government does not necessarily mean they would not be providing Soviet weapons.
Right. Ah, right. Because sometimes the CIA buys Soviet stuff. We've heard about that happening with a helicopter that was purchased in Afghanistan, or somehow a Soviet, yeah, a Soviet helicopter purchased in Afghanistan by Maverick Aviation because they wanted to do something in 2001. And obviously an American helicopter would be very out of place there, but Soviet equipment, because the Soviets were there for so long, is much more commonplace. So, Kevin, when you look at this picture of Jamal Khashoggi standing with the Mujahideen, we know he was employed by the Washington Post. We've heard a lot about CIA connections to the Washington Post. It really seems to indicate that this guy had some connection with the CIA, and maybe the CIA wanted him dead, and they had that happen at the Saudi embassy in Turkey, and maybe that's why Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about it quite so much.
Jason, that could be very, very possible that he was a CIA asset the entire time, going back to this picture. This picture, yeah, I think that's absolutely entirely possible.
Right. Everybody's acting like this is, you know, Katie Couric or something, and it's a disgrace that they've killed him. But he seems like potentially a dangerous guy. So, okay, now the other thing that we discussed right after Michael Moore's episode, I had a conversation with Larry Nichols. Are you familiar with Larry?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Did you hear that episode where Larry was telling us about his time with the Mujahideen?
No,
Do you know anything about the CIA hiring Larry Nichols as a contract employee?
no.
But it's such a compartmentalized thing that you not knowing that wouldn't necessarily make it untrue, right?
Oh, that's right. So many compartmented programs. Most agency people, even at the higher levels, only know a handful. And of course, that's on purpose. So, no, I had no knowledge of that, but there's a lot of things I didn't have knowledge of, operations that were going on that did not involve me.
Uh-huh. And also, we've heard so many stories about Bill Clinton's connection to operations in Mena, Arkansas, about Barack Obama being basically a CIA creation with his mother, Stanley Ann Dunham, and what's that guy, Frank Marshall Davis. So is it possible that if the CIA has the president on their side, I mean, they can do all this stuff behind the back of the Department of Defense with just a couple of key people, right?
Oh, not only are they able to do that, they do that.
So it's interesting. And now we see Brennan being all upset about the death of this Jamal Khashoggi and denouncing the Saudi government, which of course is being taken over by Mohammed bin Salman. And the first thing that MBS did, or that his new regime did, was to basically imprison all the people who Mr. Brennan very likely was involved in deals with prior to all of this.
Yeah, that's right. And guess who Bill Clinton's daily briefer was? John Brennan.
Really?
And they struck up a very close friendship when Bill Clinton was president of the United States. And that obviously paid well for Brennan down the road. So they've been friends since then. Now, why would Brennan say that? Brennan's got a lot to hide with his connections with Saudi Arabia and his conversion to Wahhabi Islam, and on and on and on and on it goes. So that could just be a ruse, him coming out and faking outrage when he was pretty closely connected to the Saudis when he was CIA chief of station in Riyadh.
People have questioned that, Kevin. What sort of evidence or what can we point to for the skeptics who, because people, you know, outside of maybe crowdsource the truth and outside of people who are watching the intelligence assessment, people have said, oh, there's no proof of that Brennan
Well,
converted.
except for this small problem of an eyewitness. John Guindalo, a former FBI agent, was liaison in Riyadh at the time, was there present when it happened. Now, I'd encourage everybody to go out and look at some of John Guindalo's videos. Very articulate man in terms of terrorism and counterterrorism. That's the first thing. There was a witness. The second thing, Brennan, out of his own mouth, said how awe-inspiring it was to see Medina and Mecca, the most holy places, and that the song of prayer was so gratifying. Well, you don't get into Mecca without a letter directly from an imam stating that you are a devoted Muslim, or you don't even get close to the place. So the fact that he admitted that he'd been in there and was so inspired by it, well, there's number two. So those two things alone are at least two witnesses that is Brennan's background. And thirdly, leaning more probably towards conjecture, is the fact that Barack Obama, the closet supporter of global Islam, installed John Brennan as the director of the CIA when he would not have been able to pass the CIA clearance process. And I can tell you, because that's what I used to do, with his ties to the Communist Party, with his ties to Islam, he never would have got a CIA clearance. But his buddy, because of their particular philosophical religious leanings, Obama put him as director of the CIA. That's the only way he could have gotten there.
Wow. And you know, Kevin, there's this really, it reminds me of the closing scene in The Godfather, this photograph of Brennan and Obama standing there, you know, just we're peering through the door at this conversation, and Obama is looking down. And I mean, if there's ever a photo that spoke 1,000 words, this is it right here.
Yeah, it's Vinny, man. Vinny's talking to the man, you know.
Something's going on right there. But I mean, it seems for sure. I mean, we all say, oh, you know, hashtag drain the swamp, and you know, you go to a Trump rally and everybody's with the MAGA hats and rah rah rah. But this is really a life or death fight between the executive branch of the U.S. government and this hidden shadow government that you've been speaking about for so many years. And they're not going to just say, "Oh shucks, we lost," and walk away.
No, without some sort of cataclysmic event, that is not going to happen. The CIA has been building, funding, practicing, and building this infrastructure for over 60 years. It's global, it's powerful, it has tens of thousands of people working for it. It has compartmented programs at the top that sometimes not even the president knows about. It is a government in and unto itself. That I go out as vocally as I can and demand a reform for the CIA, a dramatic reform, and I just keep doing that. God willing, maybe someday that will take, and Congress will get a spine and decide that they're really going to dig deep into the CIA. They don't want to do that because they're afraid of what they find.
Well, I think they're also afraid of repercussions. I mean, Chuck Schumer went right on TV and told Trump the CIA has 6 ways until Sunday to get back at you. That was incredibly sinister of Schumer to say. I actually confronted Senator Schumer on an Amtrak train going back to New York City from D.C. If people go back into the archives of Crowdsource the Truth or just search on YouTube for Chuck Schumer and Jason Goodman, you might find it. He was a jerk to me, and I'm a constituent, so he didn't want to talk to me. But that was a pretty open threat, I felt, and also interesting that it was delivered on the Rachel Maddow show. Rachel Maddow is a Rhodes Scholar, and Charles Ortel has spoken quite a bit about the number of Rhodes Scholars who seem to be you know, connected. And I started to think about it. If you're in college and someone comes to you and gives you this scholarship to go and start your career, and it's one of these things where as long as you go along with the program and advance through it, you're going to get money for college, you get a good degree, you get a good career, now you're on TV making a couple of $1 million bucks. Keep doing what they're saying.
Yeah, you nailed it there, Jason. What do you think the Rhodes Scholar program is? It's a program to select and groom candidates for positions of power. And it traced it all the way back to Cecil Rhodes, Cecil Rhodes was a practicing serial pedophile
Oh,
who had a group of 5 young boys that he took everywhere with him. He called them his little angels. And he was the original proponent for the New World Order.
wow.
And eventually the Rhodes Scholar Program birthed out of Cecil Rhodes. That was its roots. And now it's not a grant for some super intellectual person to go to college. It's a grant for someone that has been chosen and groomed for political power.
Wow. See, I thought that, but now you've just confirmed it. I didn't know anything about Cecil Rhodes and being a pedophile, but that's crazy. And that also ties into all the things that we've heard about Jimmy Savile and the Jeffrey Epstein Island and all of that stuff. It seems they want to lock you in. I mean, all they really need is get somebody all liquored up. We know Bill Clinton likes cocaine or whatever. You get somebody at a wild party and, you know, get some young person in there, entrap them, get them on video. We've heard about it a million times.
Oh, do you think Jeffrey Epstein is not smart enough to get him on these planes with these underage girls? They're all whooping it up, snorting or drinking, and the whole time Epstein is taking selective photographs and videos just in case he needs them later of Bill Clinton and others doing these sorts of things. Oh, you can count on it. Why do you think Epstein has such a light sentence as a convicted pedophile? Most of it in house arrest. Well, he's got the goods. Some have even postulated that he's connected to intelligence, but I'm not going to make that leap. He's a serial pedophile who practiced that, sold that on his planes and his island, and you can be sure that he photographed and videoed these people in case they ever came back to get him.
Charles Ortel has raised a lot of questions about Jeffrey Epstein based on, you know, Charles's knowledge of the world of finance and also just sort of the New York socialite scene. This guy, Jeffrey Epstein, was teaching at, I think, Dalton, which is a very, very exclusive private school in Manhattan. And you have to be a PhD, and you know, Charles has many times listed the credentials that a typical teacher at the Dalton School would have, and Epstein apparently taught there but did not have those credentials. So that was one sort of anomalous thing about him. Charles also has dealt with a lot of these billionaire types just from, you know, the circles that he runs in and the type of investment work that he did most of his career. And he said that Epstein, there's just so much about him that was setting off red flags. People have speculated that Jeffrey Epstein was connected to Mossad, and I don't know if that's anything that you know about. You've already said you don't want to speculate.
Yeah, I have heard that. Yeah, what a great place to blackmail the President of the United States, and Mossad, of course, they would do that, and they're that good. Absolutely, sure.
Wow.
Now, and there's another side to this. You know, I worked directly with Robert Gates when he was deputy director of the CIA. I traveled to 8 countries with him, and I liked him. We all liked working with him. And I'm not saying this about Robert Gates, but people like Jeffrey Epstein, pedophiles are typically the nicest people that you can meet. And most people, when they find out that this person, college professor, has been doing this, are shocked. They just can't believe it. And I think that's the way Epstein was to his students and others, plus probably the blackmail portion of it. But these people are extremely likable. What Robert Gates did, and all of us on the 7th floor liked him and enjoyed working for him. As soon as he left his cabinet position, he went back and became the CEO of the Boy Scouts of America, something near and dear to a lot of us.
Robert Gates did?
Scouts. We had some den mother teaching us right from wrong or else. Well, first thing Robert Gates did was open up the Boy Scouts to gay scout leaders.
That is so weird. The guy went from the director of CIA to director of Boy Scouts?
Yep. And he changed the rules and opened the door for gay scout leaders. Now, there's nothing wrong with gay people. I'm not saying that, but think about that in terms of pedophilia. How do you know if the person is just gay or there's pedophilia tendencies? Pedophilias always target groups of young men. Always. That's the perfect group. Wow. Secondly, that's like putting a heterosexual man in charge of the Girl Scouts.
That's true. Yeah.
There's in terms of sexual preference or impulse, it's the same thing. But that's the first thing Robert Gates did. it just really took me for a loop. That
Right.
what? Number one, I can see him taking over the Boy Scouts. That's awesome. But then doing that, it's like, what in the world is going on?
I still find it kind of weird that he would go from running the CIA to running the Boy Scouts, but all the points you raise are very good ones. And while you were just talking, it caused me to realize something else. Many, many times, Charles has brought up this issue of Jeffrey Epstein teaching at the Dalton School and not having the proper credentials. But he's there at a high school, and he's basically selecting underage girls. Now, I mean, I grew up in New York. I knew some people who went to Dalton, and most of them were super rich. There was a lot of drugs going on at the Dalton school. Like, I went to public school, and I mean, there were drugs there, but I wasn't really exposed to that. And when I went to college and met more people who had gone to some of these private schools, the richest, most private school-going people I knew were the biggest, you know, drug addicts. They were just going crazy in these private schools. So I wonder if Jeffrey Epstein isn't inserted into a place like that with the specific intention of finding the right combination of attractive and interested in drugs and willing to kind of do anything. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, well, that's what pedophiles do. They go to where their targets are and where they're the most replete. And the best place to catch a pedophile, or at least be on guard, is from daycares, nurseries, church youth groups, the Boy Scouts, and other things like that, because you can be sure that that's where, unless they've got a record, that's where the pedophiles are going to go.
And that's a part of the culture in Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia, et cetera,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, well, my goodness, you've got over in Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia especially, under Islamic law, it is accepted for a 40-year-old Islamic man to marry a 9 or 10-year-old little girl as his wife.
Wow.
And also, some of them have a group of young boys that follow them around, and Islam apparently looks the other way from that. But yes, that's being practiced.
Yeah. Camel boys or something, I've heard they call it.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So Kevin, I'm just like speechless here. It's hard to put all these pieces together. This Jamal Khashoggi, I mean, you know, they're just obviously trying to protect Barack Obama, and Obama is trying to protect the Clintons. There was just a piece that came out that was like, I mean, this is all the stuff that we all sort of know, those of us that have been exploring these things and involved in the conversation in the alternative media are fully aware that the Obama administration was stopping investigations into the Clinton Foundation, but it seems like some of this is starting to come out. Are you feeling like we're any closer to justice for the Clintons?
Well, we're the closest we've ever been with Donald Trump. There's no question about that. This is so fraught with danger and perhaps constitutional crisis because some of these people are in positions of power. So they've got to proceed slowly. But yes, I think for the first time, I told my wife the other day, these are things I dreamed about, that there actually are investigations into Hillary Clinton, into her global crime syndicate and all those connected. I think that's going to happen. It's going to take time. But yes, I do. Her and James Comey, who's been her fixer for a couple of decades, and that's a whole nother show. He's guilty of obstruction of justice in her what should have been a criminal trial. So there are several people that should be indicted. And I think after the midterm elections, I think we're going to start seeing the Trump administration start moving in.
Right. Yeah. You know, I was looking at Wayne Madsen's Twitter feed earlier today. Are you familiar with Wayne?
Yeah.
So he was saying that Donald Trump had raped a 12-year-old girl, and that's a persistent accusation, but I don't know that we've ever seen any evidence of that.
No, it's baloney. There is no evidence. You know, all you have to do is throw that accusation out there and then let it spin and let it gain strength. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not. That's a crock. Never happened, but that's we've seen pretty clearly. That's the DNC's tactic, to throw a completely horrendous, baseless charge out there, let the media pick it up to try to injure their opponent.
And even if there's no evidence, we've seen this even in the social media world. People say things about you, people say things about me. they just put it out there and a certain number of people hear it, and then that idea is kind of in their brain, and people who want to believe that sort of thing about Donald Trump. You know, it's interesting, Kevin, that rumor is one of the things that prompted me to start Crowdsource the Truth, because it was before the election and a friend of mine on Facebook posted something saying Donald Trump raped a 13-year-old girl. And I said, wow, that's shocking. Is that true? And I looked at the court documents and I was reading the case or whatever. And, you know, my friend who had posted it on Facebook characterized it as, you know, he's going on trial, and used a lot of language that was very specific to a criminal case. And when I looked at it, it was a federal civil suit filed by a Jane Doe, and it had happened 30 years before. And just the language of the way it was written. You know, earlier today I had interviewed Leslie Milwee, who is a survivor of Bill Clinton's sexual assault. And when you listen to Leslie describe the incident, she tells you everything about, you know, it was at her office. She was working as a correspondent for a news station in Arkansas. And I mean, you know, she and I were talking about the equipment that was there at the news station, the way the edit suite would have been in 1980. She said she remembered everything about it, the way he smelled, the way he felt when he touched her, you know. And so she, as an actual victim of sexual assault, 3 sexual assaults from Bill Clinton, and he came and pounded on her door at her home with the intent possibly to rape her. She said she remembered every detail of it, and she listened with a very open mind to Blasey Ford, and she felt that Blasey Ford was not being truthful at all.
Yeah, no, it's similar to a robbery. Anyone who's ever been robbed at gunpoint, they never forget it. Matter of fact, it haunts them, a lot of them, the rest of their lives. Something as traumatic as a rape, you just don't forget that or forget the detail. It is burned into your consciousness, and most young gals that go through that got to get therapy to deal with it. So to forget details like that, you know, in my opinion, as a former polygraph examiner, Christine Blasey Ford was bold-faced lying, and perhaps she may even have tried to hypnotize herself. That was one of her specialties. It didn't work very well, but I've never seen a more ridiculous interview in my life. Her body language was terrible.
Yeah. And then when we hear these stories from actual victims about the behavior and the demeanor of Bill Clinton, I think it is a very difficult thing for the average person to absorb. Like, we don't often see serial predators on television, and, you know, sure they exist, but they're, you know, I think we picture them like lurking in the shadows, hanging out somewhere scary. And then here we see a guy in a suit, he's coming on TV, making speeches, smiling, shaking hands and waving and writing books and everything. And it's just so incongruent to think that this person is doing all this kind of stuff. But I don't know. There's all these. I'm just so curious to know what this Jamal Khashoggi's role was, and you know, it's most people heard of him for the first time last week, and because it's something that they can use to hate on Trump, they love to do that. But when you start to look back at what was this guy doing in 1980, hanging out in Afghanistan, what role could he have played in 9/11? It's so many questions that remain unanswered.
You're right, Jason. Somebody needs to do some real digging in his past, and I suspect they'll come up with some peculiar things.
Yeah. So, Kevin, we've got about 5 minutes left in our hour here. Was there anything else we wanted to cover about this dubious death of Osama bin Laden? If he wasn't killed there in Pakistan, where is he, or when did he die, or what went on in Pakistan?
Well, there's so much conjecture there. What I'm focusing on are the lies that we can prove we were told.
Right.
And that's kind of what we focused on tonight, the places, the Pakistani intelligence services knowledge of the attack, which Obama lied and said it did not happen. They didn't know about it. So I'm focusing on the lies, the disinformation that the American people have been fed that's provable. Where he died, I've heard one former CIA officer out there in the public now, of whom I have a lot of respect, said that he thinks that he died of kidney failure in Afghanistan, and you know, you've got a bunch of different postulations there. The SEALs on the mission in Abbottabad in the compound all say that they killed this guy, and nobody has departed from that message, at least publicly yet. And Robert O'Neill is out there selling books and going on interviews about how he's the one that pulled the trigger that split Osama bin Laden's head open, and then they all shot him up so bad you couldn't identify him. Another crock. Number one, I have worked with Navy SEALs overseas in very tense and dangerous environments. They are the most trained, disciplined operators, at least I have ever worked with. They maintain control no matter what. So for someone to say that they capped Osama bin Laden and then all the rest of the SEALs shot him up, SEALs don't do that. SEALs don't go crazy and shoot up the body of a target that they've been sent to capture or take out. So, I just personally, this fellow Robert O'Neill that's going out there writing these books as the trigger puller, that's supposed to be a SEAL classified role, and kind of the ethics of the SEALs, the code of ethics is you keep your operations within the SEALs. You don't go out and start broadcasting an operation that usually it's classified. You get fired or charged. So I mean, there's just so much stuff around this, and the great thing about critical thinking is, which is no longer taught in our universities, critical thinking sits down and says, all right, let's look at all this. Let's be critical of what we're being told and critical of the information that's being presented. And let's find out if something doesn't match up with the facts and see perhaps there's something other than what we're being fed. And I would encourage people to practice critical thinking. When something comes out of the government's spokesperson, critically take it apart. Sentence by sentence, word by word, and just the American people, we have to be critical of our government now because it has been engaged in false flags. It's been engaged in several falsehoods to the American people. So we're already there. So I think the American public, especially on good social media sites, they're starting to become citizen sleuths. They're starting to take this stuff apart, and many of these social media news stories, the good ones, the credible ones, are doing a great job and digging things up that otherwise we'd never know about. So it's up to us. It's up to the people. As the Constitution and Bill of Rights clearly states, the government should fear us. We should not fear the government. And the government should fear us because we are critically examining every single thing it says and it does.
Absolutely. Well said. And I'm glad you mentioned that. You've reminded me of one of the most important things that we would be very remiss to not address in a conversation about the death of Osama bin Laden, and that's the destruction of Extortion 17 and the members of SEAL Team 6 and their support crew that were on board. This was the largest loss of life in the history of the Navy SEALs, and I believe the largest single loss in Afghanistan. So how does that figure into all of this? It seems very typical of the CIA. We even heard that in the case of Jamal Khashoggi, one of these Saudi special operatives died in a car accident. Yeah, well, what a coincidence again. Yes, you cannot trust the CIA. Now, at the lower levels, mid-levels of the CIA, great people, patriotic people, the CIA population tends to be quite liberal. But there are some good people who love their country down in those mid-levels. I know many of them and very close friends there. When you get to the upper levels, though, it gets disgusting. It gets post-constitutional, and they do things, kill innocent people. They've droned 8 wedding parties and killed everybody in the wedding party. Things like that people down in the lower ranks have no idea is going on. It's dirty. It's unconstitutional. In many cases, it's violations of international law. And they get away with it with the impunity of secrecy. So would you say that it's sort of standard operating procedure when you do a false flag, like say you killed Osama bin Laden, and then all the guys who know that you actually didn't, they die in a helicopter crash? Well, and the CIA would do that. It's disinformation, plausible denial. They've got some other operation going on that they think would jeopardize national security or cause unrest amongst the American people, as if that's supposed to be their decision. And they'll create a false operation to steer people's logistics away from what really happened. And you bet that's part of what they do. There are no ethics
up in the upper levels of the CIA, there are no ethics, there are no moral grounds, no rules. The end always justifies the means. Always. That's all the CIA cares about, is the end and the fact that it comes out quietly without being fingered for some of the nefarious things that it's done, and to perpetuate itself and keep itself in existence.
And how did the guy who wrote the book about pulling the trigger on bin Laden, why was he not on Extortion 17?
Yeah, something about that bothers me. I wish I could put my finger on it. I've watched several of his interviews. Just my gut feeling, something about that bothers me. Maybe we'll find out. But there's something doesn't add up.
Right. All right, Kevin. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate your excellent presentation again, as always, and I really can't thank you enough, Kevin, for creating this show with me. This has been the Intelligence Assessment with Kevin Shipp. We'll be back next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. Kevin, thank you so much for a very comprehensive report, and I want to thank all of our generous Patreon sponsors. For those that are watching on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, please also visit patreon.com/Kevin_Shipp with 2 P's, and you can sponsor Kevin there. And don't forget to go to Kevin's website. The website is fortheloveoffreedom.net, and you can go there and read all about Kevin's career in the CIA. Of course, you can purchase his book, From the Company of Shadows. You're going to get the shadow code on the website, and this is the only way to get an autographed version of the book and to purchase it from a retailer that's not controlled by the CIA. Thank you once again, Kevin. I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Jason. Good to be with you. Safe travels.
Thanks, everybody.